You don't choose to.
I'd rather have you take off the word.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
On behalf of the board and staff of the Jo Daviess Conservation Foundation, I welcome you all here to our third quarter benefactor brunch. My name is Emily Painter. I think most of you I've met you, and I'm honored to serve as the president of the board. The purpose of this event is to thank you, our highest level supporters, for your deep commitment to our land conservation mission work. You've helped us preserve and restore over 8,000 acres of land, open 10 parks and preserves to the public, and educate thousands of children and adults on these beautiful and sacred places. So thank you very, very much. Today we will be sharing an inside look with where we are headed. You will hear from our Executive Director, Steve Mark, about our plans to build the first of its kind Discovery Center in Hanover, Illinois. We're in the early planning phases of developing the Hello Discovery Center, a place where school children, families, local residents, and some of our million visitors a year to this area can learn about our natural heritage of our region and the indigenous heritage of tribal peoples who trace their ancestral homes to this area of Northwest Illinois. Where better to share this rich natural and tribal heritage than here on the lands you have helped preserve. Here we see the beautiful native prairies and woodlands intersect with incredible examples of Native American burial mounds, ancient village sites, and sacred ceremonial grounds. Places that we now have the responsibility to steward and care well forward into the future. I'm also very pleased to introduce our featured guest, Chris Pappan, right here, and his wife, Deborah. Chris is a Kansa Osage Lakota Native American artist who will share his story of discovering his tribal identity through art. And I took a sneak peek at his website before I came, and oh my goodness, I'm very impressed. He said it's not as well maintained on the website as it should be. So I think we're going to see a lot more wonderful things today, and we're grateful to that. So I hope you will enjoy this time together with like-minded people who care about the earth and all its life. And I thank you again for your just continued support of GCF. And now I'd like to introduce Steve Mark, who will tell us a little bit more. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Emily. Glad to see all of you here. We were looking for a nice little intimate way to have a conversation with you about where we're headed. And so I'm going to start by connecting some dots maybe on our journey of getting to this idea of the Hello Discovery Center. Normally I like to just keep notes and talk more extemporaneously, but the past 24 hours have been very interesting to me, for me and my wife. Nothing horrible, but just kind of an uninterrupted or an interrupted period of time. So I'm going to rely a little bit more on my notes than I generally like to do. So please just bear with me. So the journey started on a cold, chilly, mid-November day with snow that was imminent. Sound familiar? But it was 14 years ago, and a small group of people, just a handful of volunteers, gathered on a 70-acre farm field just south of Hanover, Illinois. We'll let Randy and Sylvia get seated here. Hey, Randy. Hi, Sylvia.
That's okay.
So, 14 years ago, a day much like today, a small handful of volunteers are gathered on a 70-acre farm field, soybean field that had just been harvested. And they have a lot of anticipation about what they're about to embark on. So they meet Christy out there, Christy right here, and she has buckets full of native prairie seed, and hands each of them a bucket and says, we have to hand seed this 70-acre prairie, not the whole thing, thank goodness. There was a tractor seeder doing most of it. But the tractor seeder was not going over some of the Native American heritage that's still present on the site. In particular, a bead mound, we've been told, is a sacred area. So that was going to be hand-seeded along with a few other areas. That was Christie's charge to them. So they head out and start sowing these seeds. Perfect time to sow seeds late in the season. And as they sowed those seeds back and forth, tossing thousands of seeds, tens of thousands of seeds, maybe millions of seeds onto the earth across this mound, I can only imagine, and those of you who have done this before, the joy they had of returning this land to original native prairie. As far as we could tell, that land that JDCF now stewards along the lower Apple River near Hanover has been continuously occupied by humans for at least 11,000 years. It's a really long time. I want you to think about that. 11,000 years. Think of your own study of history, how far back that goes. And most of that time, we'll say 10,700 years, it was occupied, lived on, celebrated on by indigenous cultures and indigenous peoples through that time period. We know this from the treasure trove of artifacts that have been collected by people like you and me, archaeologists, anthropologists, and who walk these fields for every year, annually, for decades upon decades. That's how much material was there in these farm fields. We now call this cherished site the Wapello Land and Water Reserve. I'm sure all of you have been there. And the prairie has grown into one of the best examples of restored prairie in Illinois, thanks to those handful of volunteers who braved the chill of a November morning a decade ago. Understanding this natural heritage of sites that we own and manage and restoring the natural heritage is something we do well. But understanding the human heritage of the site and the present day people who are the communities of people whose ancestors were there, we don't know that so well. We're just starting to learn that. The Wapello Land and Water Reserve is just one of several sites that JDCF owns where we find this natural heritage and the indigenous human heritage intertwined and interwoven. More and more, JDCF has been listening to and learning from tribal people who can trace their own heritage to Jo Daviess County in places like Wapello and Casper Bluff, and many others. It's been really eye-opening and enriching for us to meet with these people who can trace their heritage here and learn from them how they thought about the land and water resources and their care for the land and water. It's something I think we have a lot to learn from. We have been honored to learn about their knowledge accumulated over hundreds and thousands of years in these places we now are called to care for. Shortly after those local residents gathered on that farm field 14 years ago, they formed the Friends of the Wapello group. And I was told by Christy, even 14 years ago, there was an inkling in their mind as they were sowing seeds that we should develop a place where people can come and learn about this heritage, both natural and indigenous. Since then, that Friends of Wapello group has hosted dozens of different gatherings. They partnered with us and invited people like Alec Awali, anthropologists from the Field Museum, anthropologists and archaeologists like Dr. Phil Milhouse, who's here with us today, and Tim Horsley, to learn more about this heritage and these people. 4 years ago, the Friends of Wapello came to our board with a bold idea. They've been thinking about this for a long time and nurturing this idea. And that was to build this interpretive center at Wapello where these two heritages, human and natural could be interpreted in the same place. Momentum for this idea has grown over the past 4 years, in large part, because we've been inviting people from the Ho-Chunk, from the Sac and Fox, and other tribes who once called this place home. JDCF has been careful to include and share in the decision-making how this center should be thought through. In fact, the heritage that will be told there is one of the few places, we think, where heritage of indigenous people will be talked about, will be, those stories and exhibits will be developed by those indigenous people whose heritage it is. Kind of makes sense, right? So, Wapello will be one of those few places where we see this happening. On September 23rd, after 3 years of due diligence, our board of directors decided to move forward formally with the planning and design phase of the Wapello Discovery Center. This is a big decision for us. This is a new path for us, a new part of our journey. So we took a long time to make that decision. This first phase of the Wapello Discovery Center will be working with designers, historians, primarily indigenous people, learning from their stories, telling their stories. And at the end of this, in about 12 to 15 months, we hope to have a program, a clear program designed and a clear building designed for this center. It's going to be a journey, and we want you all to be on that journey with us. The board not only voted to move forward with this, but they completely committed to their time, talent, and treasure, and have already raised $80,000 within the board and other folks to work on this phase 1 development plan. I'm very happy our board, Emily as our leader, made this decision and jumped in with both feet. I think it speaks a lot about our commitment to this idea. But some of this confidence of moving forward actually came from all of you. We did several surveys this past spring. We did a feasibility study this summer. Many of you gave us feedback on should we do this or not? What do you think about this and some other ideas? And the feedback we got from you was very strong in favor of moving forward with this idea. All right, we talked a lot about heritage. And I want you to just think for a minute, and maybe over lunch, before we hear from our featured speaker, Chris, I want you to think about what comes to your mind when you think about indigenous people. I want you just to ruminate on that a little bit. And I want you to be thinking about this place that we're talking about. We'll look at indigenous heritage, but it's also going to look at contemporary indigenous people. Who are they? What are they like? What are they not like? What are their identities? What can we learn from their heritage to better steward our land, to be better caretakers, to be better people working with people on the land? I think we have a lot to learn. And so this isn't just about heritage, it's also about present day tribal communities and individuals and future indigenous people. This is a big leap for most of us, and we're going to start that leap today with Chris. We had a wonderful conversation with his wife, Deborah, who also works at the Field Museum, with Alika, actually. So we're going to jump into lunch. We're going to ruminate on that idea a little bit, and then we're going to hear from Chris after lunch. I'll be introducing him. Chris is an artist of Kansa, Osage, and Lakota heritage. His cited influences are heavy metal, a magazine I haven't even heard of, Juxtapose magazine, And the lowbrow art movement with its cultural roots in the 1970s underground comics, punk, and hot rod cultures. His art literally reflects the dominant culture's distorted perceptions of Native American peoples and is based on the Plains Native art tradition known as ledger art. He's a graduate of the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. This is where I understand you met Deborah, is that right? And is a nationally recognized painter and ledger artist. Chris's work is in collections of the National Museum of American Indian in Washington, D.C., the DePaul Art Museum in Chicago, the Newberry Library in Chicago, the North American Native Museum of Geneva, Switzerland, and the Spencer Museum of Art in Lawrence, Kansas, among others. So Chris is gonna take it away from here, and I'm really looking forward to this. Chris, thank you for joining us. I know you're a busy person, and we're delighted to have you here. So let's welcome Chris. Okay.
Hello. Hello. Okay. There's a kind of an awkward setup here, so I kind of have to dance back and forth between the computer and the mic. So you have to put your hand up to your ear, let me know, because I tend to trail off and not touch to the mic. So thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Christy, for bringing us out and for all the hard work you've done to put this all together. Thank you, Steve, for that great introduction, and welcome everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to my wife, Deborah, too, for coming out with me and experiencing Galena in this very unique area. This is our first time out here, so it's a real treat. You gave a bit of an introduction. In my presentation, there's a little bit more of an introduction about who I am. Also, throughout the presentation, I'll talk about some common themes that I've developed in my work, and then kind of where my work has gone from there, from those themes, and expanded out, and some of the other interesting contemporary Native art experiences and artists that we know in Chicago and what we're all doing together. So I really like that Steve asked you all to think about your preconceived notions of Native American people and culture, and I hope to smash all of that to smithereens. if it's bad. As Steve said, I'm Kanza and Osage. The Kanza and Osage are related. Kanza were basically like a clan of Osage, and we split off and became our own nation. And it turns out we're descendants of mound builders as well, so we claim heritage to the Cahokia site. And so, so being out here is very special. And able to think about ancestors while we're out here. And, so in this map, kind of shows you the area of northern plains folks in the green, and the Kanza in the lower left-hand side, where Kansas is, and that's how Kansas got its name from our people, Kanza. And our reservation is right next to the Osage Reservation in northern central Oklahoma today. But I myself am a very displaced person. I did not grow up in Kansas or on the Car Reservation in Oklahoma. I actually grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona. And we were just having this conversation about what people think about Illinois, and that's very flat. And out here, it's totally different. People's idea of Arizona is that it's very dry and it's all desert and cactus everywhere, but where I grew up is in the mountains of Flagstaff. Very high elevation, snows all the time, lots of skiing and stuff. So I lived there until I graduated high school, and then I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and that's where I met Deborah. She has family there, I have family there, and I came to Chicago with her. She grew up in Chicago, so that's how I ended up there. So we can all thank Deborah for bringing me here. But yeah, and then the picture of our little family there together, our exhibit in Santa Fe, was taken quite some time ago. Our daughter is actually in college now, going to Western Michigan University. So a little bit more biographical, detailed information. Talking to you a little bit about some of my influences. I'm a very contemporary person. My closest experience to Native American culture when I was growing up was the Navajo Reservation, and Flagstaff is like the next major city outside of the res there. So, my experience with Native people. My mom always told me that I'm Native, but she didn't know what it meant because she's not Native. And she's who I grew up with, so, but she always instilled a sense of pride in me, but I didn't always know how to relate to that or exactly what it meant, really. So, again, my influence is more folks from the Navajo Reservation and seeing how they acted or, what they did and how they thought and that sort of thing. But again, that's not me or my culture. So that, again, I wasn't quite sure where I fit in. But, a lot of the Navajo kids that I knew were, were very into contemporary American things like heavy metal music and skateboarding and what have you. So, so I didn't, for me, there wasn't a disconnect between the two cultures. Like the two cultures can be together within myself. So when I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts, I was really trying to stay away from, trying to make stereotypical work. I was always under the impression that to be a Native American artist, you had to always paint natives in a certain way, romanticized narratives of who we were supposed to be, and who people think of us now as being in the past, even though we're not. So when I was in Santa Fe, I was trying to stay away from that, and thankfully the instructors there at that school were very nurturing and understood that, and just wanted you to find your own voice and try to push you whatever direction you wanted to go. I graduated from there, then went to the School of the Art Institute for a couple semesters, and that was a completely different experience, and it kind of dissuaded me from going to art school, so I decided to go out on my own and try to build up my own practice on my own. And it was really difficult at first trying to figure out what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. But again, around that time, the Juxtaposed magazine, which is a magazine about street arts and like lowbrow culture, which these are examples of, I was really finding influential. And when I came across this poster of Neil Young with American Horse on it, I thought, wow, here's a non-native artist appropriating this native imagery in this lowbrow art context. What if there was a native artist out here, doing that, this lowbrow style in this context? It would totally upend what people thought about native art. So, and then also I came across the work of Douglas Miles, who's Apache. And he started his own skateboard company by painting on skateboards for his kids. And so that center image is Douglas Miles' original, and still to this day he's an influence on both Deborah and myself. So, that's kind of where my artwork journey really gained a foothold, was through like the street art style, lowbrow idea. These are some examples of ledger work that is in the Field Museum collection and also the Newberry collection. These are works by the Kiowa artist Hagone, also known as Silverhorn. And that's Charles Eastman portrait. I think it's Charles Eastman, I forget his first name. The portrait in the center is of Silverhorn, he did it himself. But actually, the piece on the lower left is a self-portrait by Silverhorn. So Silverhorn to me is very influential in the realm of ledger art because I'll explain a little bit more about ledger art in a minute, but he really moved beyond narratives of battle scenes or courtship scenes and that sort of thing. He has those, but he also illustrated creation stories in his work, which I thought was amazing. And looking at these examples in the Field Museum, I discovered that he was actually telling this long story through these drawings as like a flip book. And he was doing this in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And that blew my mind. So the top two pieces are from that creation story. And then he was also talking about spiritual ideas as well. So that piece on the lower right is describing a vision he had through the Native American church practices. And he was a big member of the Native American church as well. This journey that I've been on through ledger art has, it's taken me places and it's brought really interesting opportunities and experiences to me. One of the most, I think, deeply moving, or I don't know, it was deeply moving, but it was just, again, it was another example of the transcendency that ledger art can have. That it's not everything doesn't always fit neatly in a box. So this set of paintings and drawings. This is just one example from this book, but this is from a collection from a museum in Munich, Berlin. And this was taken from a burial scaffold on the Standing Rock Reservation in the late 1800s. But they're all drawings done in this Bible, and the Bible is translated into the Lakota language. So the person that owned this Bible, whether intentionally or not, just like used the book for the paper, to do his art in it. But to me, it's much more of a statement of, or an act of resistance against, Christianity and all of these forces that were coming to our people at that time. So, I got into doing ledger art because I came across this unused ledger book at my day job one day. I was just rifling through the office supplies and came across this, and something just clicked in my head, this would be really cool to draw on. I could call them 21st century ledger drawings. Just kind of thinking of a maybe gimmicky kind of thing, but in actuality it ends up me being more of a conduit of ancestral knowledge and continuation of our culture, and hopefully bringing it into the future as well. So these were some of the first drawings that I did on the ledger paper. And I approached it too in a way where, I wasn't trying to copy like the old style, because I didn't have any elders to teach me, what any of these narrative devices meant. So I thought I'm going to draw the way that I want to draw, and this is native culture today. So that's kind of how these drawings started. And you'll notice, I'll talk about that. So after I started doing the drawings on that contemporary paper, I started looking for historical ledger paper, like real old antique books, and they're all over eBay. There's more now than there used to be, because I think people are just really looking for it, and there's kind of a market for it now, I guess, but until they all run out, I guess, I don't know. But, I thought it would make a really great connection to the historical relevance of ledger art if I continued my contemporary style of drawing on the old paper. And so then the old paper really became a great way for the audience to, one, learn about the history of ledger art and be able to connect to myself and my artwork in that way. Because a lot of times people will see the paper and they're from that area where the ledger happened, or someone is an accountant and they're like, oh my god, I wanted to do accounting in a ledger book like that, or it's very, the history is very mundane and not grandiose, so to speak, but it's enough that people can connect to it, and then through that bridge, it's a way to help people connect with me and who I am and what I want to say about Native people today. The piece titled Thank You Grandmother was an homage to my own grandmother, who she always was encouraging me when I was very young to pursue art. My mother is very artistic. She was always discouraged from following that as a career, but my grandmother said, your mother's a great artist, that means you are, so you need to do that. And she passed away when I was young, but her words always stuck with me, and so I always think of her when I do a lot of my work. So. And then too, these drawings became a way for me to connect with my culture as well, because all of my works are done from historical photographs, and the majority of these photographs were taken around the same time that ledger art was becoming prominent, I guess you could say, in Plains culture. That being mid to late 1800s. There's a way to adjust this, and I forgot what it was. But, so it's this has been a way for me to connect to my culture, and for me to learn about my ancestors and where I come from, and also for a way that my people can learn about me and kind of welcome me back to home, basically. And again, with the power of art. I said it, it's brought us here, it's brought things into my life, but the most important thing about the power of my art is that it brought me back home, literally. And this piece back here with the big red sun on it, that was done after the Kanza had repurchased land in Kansas and built a dance harbor on that land, and I was invited out to give a presentation and be part of the ceremony to welcome us all back to our land. And so that's what that is. So there are 3 to 4 different themes that I've developed in my work. And one of them is, you'll see a lot of things on fire. But it's usually a trailer that's on fire. And thinking back to my own personal past, growing up in a rural area and being around the Navajo reservation, there's a lot of trailer parks and people live in the trailers. And to me, that trailer is a symbol of poverty. But for other folks, it's truly a symbol of freedom in that you're able to take your home with you wherever you go. And the conflicting ideas of that freedom, but having to live on a reservation in that trailer and not being able to take it anywhere is, I think, kind of cruel. But I don't mean that's reading too much into it. But anyways, I see that trailer as a symbol of poverty and a symbol of acceptance of a lower standard for ourselves. And so with the burning of that in my art, I am telling Native people and everybody else that we don't have to accept that anymore. We're in charge of our own destinies. We're in charge of our future, and we have to think about our future generations. And that we can start by burning these old ideas and moving on. Now, there are certain old ideas to hold on to, of course, and traditions are important, but there are a lot of things that have been forced upon us that we don't have to accept anymore. It can move forward. Kind of also within that realm of burning things, I've started incorporating UFOs into my work as well. And at first glance, you're kind of like, oh, that's funny, UFOs, but it's really more symbolic of the invading force of Europeans coming over this country and basically creating an apocalypse for us. But the fact remains that we are still here, and we are watching UFOs now. Another theme that I like to highlight in my work is the idea of multiplicity, or duality and multiplicity. And that actually started as a happy accident. I was doing something where I was transferring an image to something else, and I did it in the opposite way that I intended. But then I thought, at first I was like, oh, I'm so mad at myself, why did I do that? But then I thought I just leaned into it and just like, oh, I'll draw backwards and forwards. So then that really kind of blew up into this idea, taking that mistake and relating it to Native American contemporary experience. A lot of times you'll hear people say that we're living in two worlds, that Native people have to be in this world, we have to be in the American world, culture. But I'm a product of both. So I think if you're a pessimist, you can see that as one person pulling themselves apart to be in the two worlds. But if you're an optimist, you can see it as a person coming together to create a new being. So a lot of times too, I like to focus on that intersection where the two figures meet. And it's been really interesting because, along with the ledger and having that conduit to the audience, that intersection of the two figures coming together is also very reliant on the viewer, because people will kind of see things in it that I didn't always intend. So, it kind of creates an optical illusion almost for some folks. then somebody once asked me, like, oh, did you mean to draw that tree in there? And I'm just like, I don't know what you're talking about, but okay. But, and then, so then, you know, then I really started to kind of play up that melding of the two ideas of people coming together. These pieces were actually done during COVID times. So this is kind of taking that idea of multiplicity and just running wild with it, blowing it up, going crazy with it. Just thinking about, you know, all of these little pieces that kind of make up the whole. You know, each little square is very detailed, but then, you know, then when you step back, you can kind of see the whole figure with the two on the top and left. But yeah, I'm excited to kind of push this idea further and see how far it can go. And that's another thing with my work too, is just really trying to push the boundary to see how far I can go before. I mean, when I first started doing my quote-unquote ledger art, I had some what you call traditional artists kind of like, you know, brushing it off, like, yeah, I know what you're trying to do, but, you know, that's not real ledger art. And, you know, and then I've had other people in Santa Fe say, that's not ledger art, it's not a warrior on a horse. So, but I'm doing my work the way I want to do it, and I define it as this, so therefore it is. I forgot to mention too that in some of these works I have historical examples next to my contemporary examples to kind of show you that continuation. It was really interesting because when I started doing these, I wasn't really looking a lot at the older ledger works. And then when I started to, then I really started to see the similarities happening. And it kind of freaked me out at first, but because I was like, wow, I don't know if it was in my subconscious or how this all started happening. But, you know, it was exciting to know that, you know, this truly is a continuation of this art form. So another thing that's in my work is distortion of the figure as well. So again, I'm looking at historical photographs, and then I'm altering them as well. Because, you know, other than mirroring them and bringing it together, I'll distort them in different strange ways. And then at first, that stemmed from that lowbrow art tradition again, because, you know, not everything has to be anatomically correct or have the right proportions or whatever. So, but with modern technology, you can distort things in certain ways where that proportionality is still relevant, it still works, but it's, you know, things are distorted intentionally because of the distortion that has been forced upon us, that distorted ideal of who we are supposed to be as Native people, rather than who we truly are. Like you're looking at us through a distorted lens, literally, into the past. But again, I'm also very critical of Native people as well, Native artists, and if you haven't noticed already, but I also distort the figures too, because, and again, you know, thinking about when I was going to school in Santa Fe, that Native artists are responsible for keeping that ideal distorted as well. You know, by falling into those stereotypes in order to make a buck. So, I mean, I understand the need to make money and all that, but, you know, it's, you know, things cause harm to people. So yeah, the theme is distortion and transformation figures. And the transformation figures have been sort of a new thing for me as well. And I'm thinking about like the creation stories, in Lakota, there's a Buffalo woman who brought gifts to people and taught us ways. In Southern Plains culture, there's a deer woman who is a not so nice person, but it's really interesting, these the ideas of animals and people together. And it works perfectly with what the lowbrow art aesthetic as well. So this piece, these pieces actually were done in reaction to a Boy Scout manual that would teach Native American dance as a hobby. So the figures, the human part of these figures are actual how to do the steps. And I don't know how you're supposed to learn how to dance from a static black and white photograph, but and that's part of the humor in this as well, is that this is totally ridiculous. One, you're co-opting native culture or homogenizing it to make it a kid's hobby, and then so this was kind of my reckoning with that, and I really wanted to do that too because our daughter, she dances in ceremony and practice in Hamas Pueblo. And I learned what a sacrifice it is that these dancers make on behalf of all of us. Even though it happens in New Mexico, they're dancing for us here as well, as everyone around the world. So, the fact that all of that is just completely erased for someone's hobby, I just think I wanted to, again, erase that and reconcile and dream about the true meaning of dance for art. Again, through static pose. And then these are some other of the transformation figures, as I call them. And this is kind of like a blending of all these ideas kind of coming together in single pieces of work now. So there's the Buffalo woman bringing us the gift of agency, of our own autonomy, or our own sovereignty, by burning the trail. And the one with the UFOs and the deer priest, that's a piece I did this year. I just completed a artist residency at a library in Chicago. And the residency was to create work in response to a WPA mural that's in this library. And the mural depicts a scene from Marquette's journal where some local native folks, I don't know if they were Potawatomi or Ho-Chunk, but they were bringing him a deer as a gift. And so in the mural, of course, the central figure is Marquette, and there's some native guys hauling this deer out of this canoe. And as far as depictions of native people go in public art in Chicago, it's not the worst. But again, it's still centralizing the great white explorer and subservient natives, paying homage to him because he's so great or whatever. So what I wanted to do is kind of turn that on its head and explain more about the prominence of native religion and ideas and how truly great a gift that deer was to him. That probably really went over his head. So that's where the deer priest comes from, and probably showing up more in the clip. And for the library, I actually created a monumental size drawing of the deer priest, so like life size. And that's another thing that I've been striving for in my work, is to create these monumental size drawings. So, and again, citing an historical precedent for that. Ledger paper can be very small and narrow. And so in the center there, you see the original artist, he used both sides of the book in order to create a larger picture to tell more of the story. So I went with that idea, and one of the ledger books I found on eBay, it's very large, 18 by 18, So when you take the pages out, it becomes 18 by 36, and then when you stack them on top of each other, it's like, you can do a whole room in Legislator if you wanted to, but, so yeah, these drawings that I did are basically life-size drawings. And all in graphite. And so again, kind of thinking about pushing the boundaries and how could I define ledger art and what defines ledger art for me as a Plains person? How are different ways that I can approach this? One way was that I was granted an opportunity to create an installation at St. Mary's College, which is right next to Notre Dame in Indiana. So yeah, like Notre Dame's the big Catholic school, and then St. Mary's is like the French women's Christian school or something. But yeah, this was a great opportunity because I've always been thinking about how can I expand this idea more and more. So I took this opportunity and went with it. So what I did was I incorporated some of the geometric patterns I'd been working with. The big red cross actually symbolizes a star in Southern Plains culture, so it has a celestial reference. And then it's actually supposed to be a blue dot, it's not black as it appears in the photo, but the big blue circle references the moon, and the yellow references both mountains and the river, like the river of life pathway. So both celestial and earthbound references. And then I took some ledger paper and just kind of, in order to relate it to that tradition, kind of made a timeline with the ledger paper. So, Deborah has been involved with the Native community in Chicago for a while, a number of years now, because she used to work with the Indian Education Program through CPS. And she developed a partnership with the Field Museum in Alakawali through that education program. And that was when Alaka had started to bring in contemporary Native artists in order to react to items from the collection and to bring a contemporary voice into the Field Museum. So, how long have I had? I've been going a long time. Okay. Yes, I have been going a long time. I'll try to speed this up. So, this is an installation that I did at the Field Museum. Became more of an intervention and putting my artwork literally in between the viewer and the historic artifacts so that people had to think of us as contemporary people rather than looking at us in the past. So these are some shots from that. Also, this gave me an opportunity to work in another medium to again think about how to expand the idea of ledger art. So I was able to create a video, which I'll show you now, that was in the hall. So what I did was I used one of the first motion pictures ever created using a kinetoscope that was invented by Edison. Kind of thinking of that as like a ledger paper, the historic substrate, and then putting images on top of that of contemporary Native folks, who we are today. That's our daughter. And I also incorporated some ledger paper in there as well. And then also being able to distort the film in different ways to look through that distorted lens. interesting thing about the Field Museum exhibition too is that people seem to, not everyone, but some folks kind of had I guess you could say, a difficult time in kind of processing this idea of contemporary Native people in front of them. So, from my own observations, I would watch people and, they would look at my work and just kind of like go around, because it wasn't part of the whole exhibit, it was kind of like down the center, and then, there's still stuff around the periphery, so people would end up going around the periphery where my work wasn't. And, just kind of, relating to, the old artifacts that were on display, bow and arrow, that kind of thing. But with this video playing and the audio permeating throughout the whole hall, there was still that reminder of our contemporary existence. That's what Deborah looks like without her mask. And then that audio is powwow announcer talking about wax cylinders that they were playing at a powwow, and how they went into the archives and heard the ancestors' voices. And that was, I thought that was incredible, because this is exactly what we were doing. And then that, and then the singing is from an actual wax cylinder as well. And the soundtrack was done by the same artist that Santiago Reyes. That was around the same time too as Standing Rock, so 2016, 2018. And so, yes, from that, I've gotten a lot more opportunities. One of which was a multi-city public art project started by the High Line in New York City. I forget what the name of the organization is, but Friends of the High Line, I guess they're called. But New York, Chicago, in Chicago it's called the 606. Toronto, in the Toronto area, it's called the Bentway. There's one in Austin and one in Houston. So there were 5 cities that these artworks went to. And they chose 5 artists from each of the different cities. So I was one of the 5 selected from the Chicago area. And land acknowledgements were a big thing at the time, but still are. It's when people really started to talk about land acknowledgements and the indigenous people of those areas. So what I did was a land acknowledgement memorial for Chicago. So this was a drawing that was done on a ledger that survived the Chicago fire. The date on the ledger is 1871. So, and then the coloring is representative of that fire as well. And so I thought it was a nice tie into my work as well with the burning of the trailers. And that ledger paper also has that symbolism of resilience as well. And then there's kind of a map in there too. It's like a old Chicago. So this was my land acknowledgement memorial piece that I did, which is available to you folks. Another opportunity I was afforded was to again create a ledger piece that goes beyond the paper. So every year, Art Expo gives artists opportunities to show their work on the electronic billboards along the expressways. So I created this piece for the electronic billboard. So it was really fun driving around Chicago and not trying not to crash into anyone whilst looking at all of the billboards. But as you know, in Chicago, you really don't go anywhere fast, even on the expressway. So the piece is about Kitihawa and the indigenous people. Kitihawa was DuSable's wife, who was Potawatomi. She, because of his marriage to her, was the reason that DuSable was able to come and settle in the Chicago area. So it's oh, and this is the mural I was talking about earlier from that magazine. So yeah, this is the original mural was painted by William. I always want to say William Babcock, but yeah, it's a WPA mural. And as well as the deer priest drawings that I'm doing, I'm also trying to incorporate language, indigenous language, back into the library, because the library is a place for language. So what I did was I worked with the language department at Pokagon Band Potawatomi and chose words that relate to things that are in the mural. So this happened supposedly on the Chicago River. So that fight's Jigagash Zide, or I'm probably butchering that, but in the Potawatomi language. So there will be these flags displayed throughout the library. The colors are also reminiscent of the colors in the mural. And then there are two of the deer priest drawings that are life-size that will be installed across from that mural, and acting like a monument. And so those are some of the earlier sketches that I did. It's kind of how that idea developed. This is the latest project I'm working on, which I don't know if I'm allowed to share with you, but I'm sharing it anyways. This is going to be installed in the new Terminal 5 International Terminal at O'Hare Airport.
Wow.
So, thank you, but this is actually kind of like a consolation prize because I applied for something a lot bigger to incorporate a lot more Native artists, but we were kind of like, no, we can do this instead. So again, I'm really trying hard to advocate for Native people of this area as much as I can. So this, you may recognize this as the land acknowledgement drawing, but these will be done on acrylic, printed on acrylic, and then put over wood backing. So kind of the idea being to reference Simon Pokagon's Red Man's Review, which he printed on birch-bark paper. So. That's that. And the last thing, just real quick. Some of the stuff that we're involved in, some of our friends are involved in. We've started an art space for contemporary Native artists in Chicago called the Center for Native Futures. We have backing from the Terra Foundation. We have a space that we're working on getting finalized that's being donated from the MacArthur Foundation. And that's just the start of it. So really looking forward to that. Our friend Andrea Carlson, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us, but is doing amazing things. She created this massive mural. You are on Potawatomi land. This is right next to Michigan Avenue, so that's Lower Lacquer Drive that these panels cover. And then in the lower left, there is a mound that was created by our friend Santiago. did this as well. So he's actually working to build new mounds within the city of Chicago. He did a serpent mound. Serpent mound, yeah, in one park already, and this is like a coiled serpent mound right on Urban Park in California, in Chicago. Okay, thank you so much for bearing with me. I didn't realize we could go on so long, but I appreciate it. Question and answer?
Yeah, we will chat a little bit about that.
So, well, I think we can have this, I think people could ask questions here. Chris, thank you so much for coming out here. I'll start with a question.
You use the mic.
You are asked to speak a lot. Why did you choose to come out here?
I will admit, at first I was a little hesitant, because sometimes you just don't know people's intent. A lot of times, things that involve Native artists and Native people, it's kind of a one and done type situation. Like, okay, we got our Native for the month of November, we can move on. Or we got somebody to come out to do our land acknowledgement, we're good. But I talked to Christy on the phone, and she talked about, a lot of the initiatives that you guys are working on with actual nations, and that sealed the deal for me, that you guys are actually putting Native people first and working with them hand in hand to conserve these important resources, both cultural and agricultural, I guess. Not agricultural, but environmental resources. So, yeah, that's again, beyond kind of important.
So, Christy and I have talked a lot about how do we think about in the center attracting young people, and not thinking about tribal people simply as the past, but present day and future. And so this was really interesting for me, I hope for the rest of you, to help us understand how you're seeing your own identity and how you're working through bringing heritage and past into present and future as your own cultural heritage and future. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
I think if you put it in the hands of Native people to tell their own story, then that's all you need to do.
Mm.
Because our stories are powerful enough in that, all people from everywhere will want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's somebody else telling someone else's story, then, it doesn't have that same power. And so, to me, it just seems like it's much easier and more of the right thing to do, to let us tell our own stories in our own way. And we all don't have the same experience. So, I'm sure some of you may be surprised to hear what I'm talking about today. Like, you weren't expecting me to talk about some of these things, like heavy metal music and skateboards, but that's part of who we are. And because we grew up in this country, that's there's no avoiding this. But we do have our own unique take on things, and again, I think there's enough power in that. That if you just make that central, then that will draw young and old and everyone across the board.
Yeah.
I think that they're finding that at the Field Museum too, in that because for so long, they relied on the quote-unquote experts to tell the story that a lot of things that they told are wrong or misleading. And now with the renovation of this display hall, it's all from the first place perspective. it's gonna be very dynamic, very different.
Anyone else have a question on their mind? Can you, I'll end with one thought. Anybody else have a question? I don't wanna. Okay. Tell us your understanding of ledger art and the history of that, because you bring that forward in new ways. Well, tell us where ledger art originated in Plains culture.
So from what I've learned, and I mean, this is true too. It's not, it's. I always think of it as an artistic revolution, because before that introduction of paper through those ledger books of soldiers and merchants, our narrative art forms were done on clothing or on teepees and that sort of thing. So then when this paper was introduced, then that became a much more economical, portable, easy way to remember our history. And so that's basically how it started. And I think it's called ledger art because that was the paper, was ledger paper. So, but it's interesting because some of those examples I showed you, particularly of Silverhorn, they're still considered ledger art even though they're not done on that paper. But it's because they're telling a story and they're drawn in a certain way, it's still considered ledger art. So, then in the late 1800s, as we were being forced onto reservations and people were being put into prison camps, particularly Fort Marion in St. Augustine, Florida, ledger art actually became an early art commodity. So at Fort Marion, tours were actually given to outsiders to come in and see the Indians, basically. And the prisoners there would create drawings to sell. So they'd sell some of these drawings for a dime or whatever. So that's kind of that story, that tradition. And again, thinking about it as an artistic revolution, I think helps to validate my idea and what I aim to, not to do with it, but the aims that I have for it and kind of guiding it towards the future and keeping it growing.
Well, thank you again, Chris. Deborah, thank you for bringing Chris here, and thank you for what you're doing at the Field Museum. I really enjoyed our conversation before we started. We hope to be with you again, Chris, at some point in the future, and look forward to. I just took a picture of this on Sunday and sent it to my daughter. I have to be in Chicago on Sunday, so thank you again.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your gift.